Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Making It Work, Networking Now. My name's DJ Martin, Director of Advertising for the Portland Press Herald. Today, our Business Projects Editor, Carol Coultas, will be moderating the panel discussion on making the most of who you know in the age of COVID. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors for their support of our program. And that's a thank you to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, MEMIC, Cross Insurance, and Katahdin Trust Company. Here to say a few words for MEMIC is Tony Payne.
Thanks very much, DJ, and welcome everybody. This is another great forum presented by the Press Herald and to all the readers of the Maine Today publications across the state. What I'd like to do is first and foremost say I have been to events since the vaccination was delivered. I am boosted, and this morning attended an event, and I can tell you that being able to dress again, not only I think has been good for me, getting out, seeing people, but it's also really good for the dry cleaners. They're going to be back in business. Having said that, MEMIC is a very proud sponsor of this. We represent about 18,000 employers in the state of Maine for purposes of workers' comp. And our mission, as you know, is to keep people safe. And if they do get injured or infected as a part of their work, we want to make sure they regain their health and return to work as soon as possible. With that said, though, we also caution, as we have on our website at memic.com, that everybody, as you do return to gatherings, and we'll hear lots of good information today, do so safely, be conscious. One of my favorite words out of this entire pandemic has been be intentional. And so be intentional about your own safety and the well-being of others. Get your vaccination, please, if you haven't done so. And if you need a booster, get that as well. So with no further ado, I'll turn it back to the program. Thanks so much.
Thank you, DJ. Thank you, Tony. Welcome, everyone. So here we are, 20 months into a pandemic. And for a while there, around early summer, late spring, I think we thought things were going to return to normal. People had begun going back into their offices. Folks were starting to plan events again. And then suddenly there's a surge and the Delta variant raises its ugly head. Today we had 650 new cases of the coronavirus and sadly 7 deaths, which just makes us wonder, how do you know if it's safe to get together again? And, for business managers who are even trying to figure out, can I have my employees get together for a lunch and learn? Can we attend in-person events? What about conferences? How to figure this out for the safety for your own workers, but also if you want to host something, how are you supposed to figure out the proper and best way to do that? Are there tips about doing hybrid events that would be helpful to share? So as it turns out, just last week, I was at the first conference I've been to in a very long time. And I was there not as a journalist, but as a proud daughter. My dad was inducted into the Cooperative Credit Union Hall of Fame. And there were 300 people at this conference. And it had an exhibition hall and there were breakout rooms. It was a full-on conference. And I just kept thinking, I don't know how comfortable I feel in this environment. And I could see that hesitation reflected by a lot of other people who were seeing coworkers or colleagues and just kind of awkwardly waving because they weren't sure they could shake hands and they felt funny doing the elbow bump. So this is where we find ourselves. And so also kind of concurrently, so many of us have turned to online platforms as a way to connect with one another and to get professional development information and to just sort of keep the business of work going forward. It feels to me like online events and networking is here to stay. Certainly these B2B webinars that we have been doing since the pandemic struck used to be in-person Portland Public Library events. And I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure we're going to continue using the online platform because it has been really efficient for us. And we also host something called Policy Matters, which is a policy forum I organized that, and we have had panelists from as far away as Canada and Florida and even Old Town participate via this technology, who could never have been able to join us for an in-person event at Hannaford Hall, say. So I think that this is our new normal, and for folks who are used to networking in person, shaking hands, exchanging business cards, there is a way to get a lot out of online opportunities such as this, such as a Zoom platform, and to use it effectively. And so this whole notion of how we gather, how we network, represents new opportunities for us. And today we have two terrific people who are going to help us unravel that and also give us some really good advice. Joining me today are Stefa Normantas, co-owner of Green Tree Event Consultants, and Jodi Flynn, executive leadership coach with Women Taking the Lead. And Jodi in particular has one of the things that makes her, I think, a great timely person to have on this panel is she's also the board president for the Maine Women's Conference, which is happening in just a couple of weeks. And she has personally been wrestling with these issues. So I think that her perspective will be really good to hear. So Stefa is a seasoned event manager, and in addition to co-owning Green Tree Event Consultants, she also is co-owner of New England Products Trade Show and New England Made Show. These are all Maine-based event service companies, and she has had a long history with pulling these together on any sort of scale. So whether it's just directing a trade show, managing a conference for hundreds of people, she's really good at it, and she's an especially good project manager. In addition to her work with Green Tree, she is also the president of Saco Main Street, a board member of Camp Naringa, former board member of the Pine Tree Society, Maine Marketing Association, and former president of the Ad Club of Maine. She holds a dual undergraduate degree in communications and studio art and a master's degree in communications management from Simmons College. And as I said, Jodi is the board president for the Maine Women's Conference, which goes, I believe, from November 8th to November 10th. So put that on your calendars if you haven't already. She is an executive leadership coach. She's a podcaster, author, speaker, workshop facilitator. People generally will hire Jodi to coach and to work with their female leaders in order to master their leadership skills and advance their careers. She's the host of the critically acclaimed Women Taking the Lead podcast and Amazon bestselling author with her book Accomplished, How to Go From Dreaming to Doing. And as I mentioned, president of the board for the Maine Women's Conference, and has been featured in Entrepreneur and Forbes magazine. So welcome to our panelists. So let's get the ball rolling. So here's my first question. Many business managers are stymied and confused about gathering in person, whether in an office or organizing for an event. Can you lay out the steps a manager should consider when contemplating an in-person gathering? Stefa, I know you've got some guidelines to share, and Jodi, I think this is helpful for you to talk about the process that you and your board used when you were working on structuring the Maine Women's Conference. So take it away, ladies.
Sure. And I'll just start, and thank you, Carol, for including us. I'm delighted to share. We've been doing live events only for the last month or so. And so it's been a long dry spell of 18 or so months of no events. So it's taken a lot to adjust, to figure out like, all right, what works and what doesn't. And we're still figuring out as things change. So I think the first point is really just people are toasted right now. So giving each other a little grace, to sort of figure this out and acknowledge if you're going to an event and somebody hasn't quite figured it out or hasn't quite nailed it, just give them a little extra, because, it's just, it hasn't been easy for everyone. And I think just allowing people to acknowledge that they are trying to do the best they can. So I start with that, but really understanding that things have changed, whether it's important to meet, how you meet, all of those things have shifted. Right now, our attention spans are different than they were 18 months ago. You know, the ability for us to be on screen is different. The way people handshake and that awkwardness of do I bump, do I wave hello, all of those things have changed. And the uneasiness that people do have in walking into a crowded room, that's changed. So whether you're meeting or not meeting, you just need to be aware of that. And as you start to consider, do I meet, do I not meet, really, as Tony mentioned earlier, using that word of intentional, really stepping back and figuring out what is the goal of that meeting. Is it something that I can do virtually, or is it better in person? Some of those culture pieces we know are just so much more difficult to handle on online. The difference between virtual and in person, really, as we all painfully in many cases have learned, it's just not the same experience, but it still can be a valuable experience. So taking a step back, are we doing training? Is this to inspire our team? And what way is the most appropriate given the needs of the group? The third thing is really providing provisions for those that may not be comfortable in person. Is it something where you might be able to do online engagement earlier so that somebody that isn't comfortable meeting in person has a little bit of an entryway and isn't excluded in the same way just because of their particular situation? So spending a little extra time, if you are having a live event, to consider what can I do for that person that may not be comfortable in here? Does it have to do with spacing? Does it have to do with recording a session so that somebody can engage in it later on? So there's different combinations that can pave the way to make it a rich experience for everybody that wants to be a part of it, but including those that may not be able to participate as fully as the entire group. Another item is really just getting down to logistics. If you are meeting, considering that our spacing comfort levels have really changed. That crowded room doesn't feel quite as comfortable for many these days. Your breaks, how do your breaks happen? No buffets, no, sort of those things, those areas where people typically would congregate. You want to split those up a little bit more. And if there are patios or outdoor options, making good use of those. I know we're coming into the winter season, but there's still a lot of good things, and we are a hardy group. So the outdoor maybe is a little more appealing than it may have been in prior years. And I'll just finish on whatever your policy is, just make sure you communicate it clearly. Mask, no mask, room capacities, all of those things really are important. People are checking ahead of time now to see what is the policy of this, because everybody is coming into it with different health needs and different comfort levels. So really right up front in bold type, letting people know how you'll be managing the health requirements around the event.
So Stefa, I'm curious. So when a client says we're still not sure if there's some discomfort, we want to do this in-person event, we're not sure. Like, are there particular resources that you refer them to? Do you refer them to the CDC, or do you refer them to trade groups that may have established protocols for, if you're thinking of meeting in person, here's what we have found to be, useful. I mean, where do you direct people who are looking for that kind of public health guidance?
Initially, we recommend that they really just start with themselves. What is their comfort level for themselves, their board? Like, what is what's the appetite, what's the interest level, and what's their comfort level? So it really starts with an individual choice, and then we direct them to their state and then the CDC of what mandates, but also encouraging them to be flexible in the sense of, just because the mandate might be that masks are optional, the decision for you and your group may not be you may not want to follow that. You may want to make your own decision. So it is very much an organization's decision primarily of where they want to go with it, as long as they're following in with the guidelines. So we really start with that gut check of, how do you feel? How do you think your audience will feel? You know, what's their comfort level, and really paying attention to that.
Good. So Jodi, what was it like for you with the Maine Women's Conference planning?
There was a lot of discussion into the points that Stefa made as well. With the board for the Maine Women's Conference, there's 17 of us, and we all have different perspectives and risk tolerance and that sort of thing. But what really helped us in the many robust conversations we had around this topic was, what is our mission? And our brand promise. Our mission is to draw women together, to connect, educate, inspire, and empower one another to assume new and expanded roles in the workforce, our lives, and our communities. So the big question was, how do we continue to deliver on that mission if we can't get together in person? And luckily, our 2020 event was planned to be at the Holiday Inn by the Bay. They gave us a lot of grace to take some time to make that decision. We have a board member who's in the events industry. So we were like, what's happening? What's the word on the street? We were trying to find out what were other organizations doing as well. What was the CDC saying? What was the governor saying? Watching the news. We took a lot of things into consideration and immediately went to an online platform. We started doing webinars, and we thought, yes, we can continue to deliver on our mission in the virtual world. And we considered for our annual conference postponing till the spring, postponing a year. Do we have an outdoor event? And we had to do a lot of research to figure out what, even because we're a pretty new organization in our, going into our 4th year, what could we afford? Right? We needed to make decisions that were not going to put us in a bad position fiscally, nor did we want to be known as that event that caused a super spreader in Maine. Right. And so ultimately we decided the best road to go for this year was to do a virtual event. And I will tell you, and I shared with my board members, come the summer, I was so grateful we had made that decision, because at the time we made the decision, it looks like this is the best decision. We won't know for sure, but we can all feel comfortable and confident going forward with this decision. And it had, in comparison to some of the other options, minimal fiscal risk that allowed us to continue to deliver on our mission. And I'm very happy with that decision right now.
How long did it take you to get consensus with 17 board members that this is the way, this is the best option?
It took a little while, and I'll admit I might have been part of the bottleneck, because I love in-person events, and I was like, hold on, a vaccine is coming. I think it was right around this time last year. We had already decided to postpone a year, but we had to make a decision. Were we going to be in person? Were we going to be virtual? Were we going to try to do a hybrid event? And when I heard vaccine, I was like, this is great. Like, let's hold on. We'll all be vaccinated and all our problems will be solved. But luckily there were members on the board as well who, delivered information very, very kindly, very directly and succinctly, and helped us all to, realize that considering the things we were trying to avoid and the things we were trying to create, this was the way we were going. And, and ultimately the decision, there were a few people who wanted to postpone indefinitely until we could be in person, but the majority of the board decided to do a virtual event. And once that decision was made, everybody aligned to make that happen.
Oh, that's really good. Good. And so also here, we all seem to have developed a new skill set in terms of considering hybrid events. And several of the hybrid events that I've participated in have operated simultaneously as an in-person event. And in my conversation with Stefa, when we were chatting before this, she's like, yeah, that may not be the best way to do it. So now we have some specialization around hybrid events. And I'm just wondering, Stefa, what kind of advice can you offer? Is there a new protocol? Like here's the best way to get buy-in and to help people when you're looking at pulling together a hybrid event.
Sure. And I'll have Strawberry just pull up that slide to talk us through. I will say candidly that from a technology standpoint, then a hybrid does have a solution, does have solutions, but they're not optimum. They really technologically haven't cracked that nut because it tends to favor one audience or another. If it is a virtual event, but you have in-person groups sort of watching that screen, then it's like a studio audience effect. Mm-hmm. And if you have it virtual with a live event partner, then usually the people that are virtual are feeling like they're on the sidelines. And it's very, very difficult to get that mix. So what we've seen as an industry trend and what we recommend is that you really do split up that event. You can have that same overarching event, but you have a live event that's live for those that can come. You have a virtual event that may be a day or two beforehand. That's an alternate time frame where you have programming around that, but you don't try to ride two horses and really do those well. Typically, one audience gets the focus, and it's very, very difficult, I think. There are great platforms out there that try to do the best they can, but typically if you're coming into that, you can see which direction it's been skewed to, whether virtual or whether in person. And if you're sitting on the opposite side, then it doesn't feel like you're getting the fullness of that event. There's also a hub and spoke model that's out there now where you have geographically, say it's a national event, then you might have meetings happening in New York. You might have a mini live event in Austin. You might have another one in DC. And then you combine that virtually with a global, with a more global virtual event. And those work well because you do have those in-person exchanges, and you can bring people together and you can continue that conversation through that whole time frame through engaging people online in chats, doing chat roles, having different other modes that continue to engage people throughout that whole time frame.
And would you say that if you're going to go that route, the planners should be prepared for doing a fair amount of extra work? I'm thinking of my husband, who's a school teacher, and he has one set of lesson plans when he's in the classroom, and he has a separate set of lesson plans when he's teaching remotely. So, I just sort of assumed that, but I thought it'd be worth asking.
Very much so, Carol. And the expense, if you're doing your virtual event, then within a live event and trying to tape that to video, to have the right camera angles, to have the right engagement level, it's very expensive to do that effectively. Of course, you can set something up and where it's just a mic and a video screening something, but the level of engagement isn't really going to deliver too much value to your audience. So it really is that 2-event process, and that's why we encourage people just to split it off, because you'll feel better, you'll have more resources to attend to one or the other, and have them able to focus on delivering a great experience for your audience.
Mm-hmm. And Jodi, did you think about having a live component to the Maine Women's Conference when you guys were planning that?
There were some pieces that we were considering live. And again, Stefa spoke to this. We did not get a sense that there was an appetite for it. We also, got the impression that there would be hesitancy, and there would be financially, we would have to put down quite a bit of money and potentially not have the attendance that we were looking at as well. So it is one of those things, and we're pretty nimble. So if we wanted to do something in person, if a week from now, we're like, we could get a gathering together and could we do this? We probably could. We're keeping our options open. Like I said,
good.
I'm not alone on my board, being the type of person who cannot wait to be able to gather in person in Maine. But again, very mindful of the risk that involved right now and the hesitancy. Like you said, it's a little awkward to get together in person right now. And we want to make sure that the events that we do, that people feel comfortable and like they can let their guard down a little bit and be personable.
Mhm. So Tony's not following the rules. He didn't put his question into the Q&A bar, but I think it's worth asking, and that is, how are you seeing people, dealing with, all right, if we are going to have a live component, how are we going to make sure people who are gathering are vaccinated? Are we going to require that we see vaccination proof or a negative COVID test? Or I know, Stefa, when you and I chatted previously, I had mentioned I'd been to an engagement party and people had wristbands, and you were supposed to, and they were all color coded, and you were supposed to know the wristband is, yes, I'm comfortable with, being 3 feet from you. The other color is, no, I don't want to be anywhere near you. We can just wave. So I'm, how are people coming to those decisions? Are they mandating vaccinations? Are they trying to come up with ways that to make people feel comfortable gathering in person?
I think it goes back to that earlier piece of communicating to your audience ahead of time really clearly, whether it is uploading, having your audience upload their vaccination status beforehand and making it a requisite of attendance. Part of it depends on your group and the format of what your event will be. If it's a small group, maybe not so much. If it's a larger group, that gets to be more important to more people. So starting off with that clarity in your expectations for your audience and what they can expect from a health protocol standpoint. But I've seen industry-wide the whole gamut of we want your COVID, proof of vaccination, or, your test results, to, your mask is optional.
I just got back from a weekend in New York City, and every institution there required a proof of vaccination and an ID card, as did many of the restaurants and the taverns that we visited. So, and I didn't hear anybody grousing about it, which I thought was a little bit surprising, but that was the direction that they decided to go. So,
And I think the audiences are getting more familiar with, all right, when in Rome, bring your COVID chart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. So let me sort of shift a little bit, and I see that we have like 13 people in our chat right now, and so we, this business of connecting virtually is just something we're going to be doing, I think, going forward. And I've been in this world for a fair amount of time, and I remember having to first learn to look somebody in the eye and shake their hand and have my business cards in my pocket and exchange them when I made a connection with someone. And now that has all, moved to online. And so I'm wondering, what are the tips? Like, how can we learn to network effectively when we're all looking at these little, two-dimensional images or one-dimensional images online, and trying to figure out whether that's somebody I could make a professional connection with, or I really like that person's comment. So, like, what are some best practices? And Jodi, I'm going to ask you that because I know that's in your wheelhouse.
Yes, for sure. And there's a slide that helps go over this information. So I put it from the perspective of before, during, and after the event. So before you go to a virtual event, be sure to update your LinkedIn profile ahead of time. Make sure you have a robust profile. Fill in, your name, your business, have a tagline, have a great headshot that lets people know what you look like. We connect with faces, we're virtual, but we like to see people's faces. And then your about section, make sure it talks about you, the work you do, or the work your company provides. And don't forget to fill out things like the schools you graduated from, your certifications, see if you can get clients, customers, or coworkers to give you recommendations in your LinkedIn profile, because people look at these things, and they also search for these things as well. I had a client connect with me because we went to the same coaching school, you know, and she was looking for a coach for someone within her company, and immediately felt that connection with me because of that. So you want to make sure that you're ready for, it's like your online business card to some extent, but you know, there's your website, but your LinkedIn profile really gets to the heart of who you are and what you're doing in the world. And also some of the platforms for these events allow you to fill out a profile online. Again, fill it out completely. This is how I know the platform that the Maine Women's Conference is using, Whova. They allow you to fill in your hobbies and your interests and things like that. And this is how we connect with people. You know, we find those commonalities, and then and it's something you can reach out to that person about and say, hey, we have this in common. Now, during the event, you know, typically, you know, we ask people like, hey, say hello in the chat, say where you're calling in from. But I'm going to recommend on this call, so I'm going to ask everyone to do it right now, and I'm going to ask you to continue to do it in the future. In the chat, put your name, your title, and the company that you work for. And then also put in the link to your LinkedIn profile, and also include the HTTPS / so that it's a clickable link. And so as people are engaging and attending a webinar, they can click on your link and it will take them right to your LinkedIn profile, and they can connect with you right away, right when you're on the call. So, and also be active in the chat, comment on what the panelists, the moderators are saying, you know, what has your experience been? Because other people who are attending this webinar are reading your comments as well. They're getting to know you as you're commenting. So, and then engage with the other participants as they're putting things in the chat. Say, hey, that happened to me too, or I was at that event, or yes, I've seen that in my industry as well. And if it's relevant, if there's a participant who you feel especially connected with, that you have something in common, you can send them a private message and say, what do you think about doing a virtual coffee? Or in person, if you feel comfortable and you're both local, you could say, hey, I'd love to get to know more about your business, or I think there could be an opportunity here. How about we set up a time to do a virtual coffee or an in-person coffee? And then after the event, continue to build relationships, right? You've been connecting on LinkedIn, say hello to them, comment on the posts that they're putting in on LinkedIn, you know, build that relationship. And the benefit on LinkedIn is when you comment on other people's posts, it lists not only your name, but also the tagline you've put in LinkedIn as well. So everyone who's reading the comments on that post sees your name and what you have as your tagline on LinkedIn. So stay active, you know, stay connected to people, and continue to build those relationships. You absolutely, absolutely can build relationships, much like, it's not exactly like, but much like we would do when we were in person. I have met many, many wonderful people since the lockdown started. And I've also sent them business and have received business from people I've never met in person. And there are women on the board of the Maine Women's Conference I have yet to meet in person, but I feel we are friends, you know, and we're aligned together. So I will say nothing replaces that in-person connection, but we can get very close to it. It doesn't have to hold us back.
So I'm still mulling over all of this information, Jodi. What is your tagline? Like, what's your personal tagline, and how do you suggest people adapt one?
Yeah, so my tagline, and it changes. I play around with it. You don't have to be married to it. You know, sometimes my tagline says executive leadership coach. Okay. You know, right now, I think my tagline says helping companies retain their high-performing women. You know, it's something about you and the work you do that would create interest, that would make someone want to click on, you know, if it's in the comments, you know, your name is hyperlinked back to your profile. I want people to read my comment and go, that's interesting. let me see what she's about. Click on my name and go read my profile. So your tagline is, something that you're doing in the world.
Stefa, do you have a tagline?
I do, but you know what? I don't look at I'll be honest, I'm not awesome at the LinkedIn thing, so I'll confess.
We're all getting better at it, Stefa.
I would say that my tagline probably reads on that event manager, expert, or, something along that line. So. And then sometimes I throw things in, like I'm a beekeeper too. So sometimes I throw it in just for a little, like another hook, just to sort of throw it out there too. So.
And so would you say that LinkedIn is kind of it? That's the sort of the universally accepted platform for doing this networking online? I mean, I remember being forced to create a profile on LinkedIn because I'm, as common in my generation, I'm not really big on social media. And then I create it and then I forget about it. But now I'm thinking maybe I should be a little more engaged with that particular platform. That's sort of universally accepted as the best place to make these connections, Jodi?
It's not the only place, but I would say professionally and in the business world, it is the place to be. Now, some businesses do lend themselves well to Instagram and Facebook. If you're a photographer or a chef, or, if your business lends itself well to being very visually appealing, Instagram is lovely too, but don't snub LinkedIn, because it used to have a reputation as being very austere, not very friendly. Right. A lot has changed and LinkedIn is exploding. And the same pictures you put on Instagram, you can put on LinkedIn. And I know a person who's an artist whose business exploded when they joined LinkedIn because they started putting posts on LinkedIn about their art. And then hotels and companies started buying their art to put in their offices and their spaces, right? So I would say from some of the other platforms can get a little muddled, but I would say LinkedIn is a fantastic place to do the networking that we were doing in person and will continue to do even when we are in person.
So talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that arise from doing this kind of virtual networking, some surprising ways that virtual networking has made a difference. Stefa, you and I talked a little bit about being able to use it in a way that results in meaningful conversations as opposed to sort of the space-filling small talk that we used to engage in when we would be at an in-person event.
No, I think it goes back even to that, the word Tony was using, being intentional. I think you just have to work a little bit harder to get used to this new technology. So you're the one that has to go first. You're the one that has to put in the effort to expand, whether it's including things in the chat. And I just think sometimes it's too big for everybody to think, oh my God, I've got to do the big networking sort of thing, but setting that reasonable goal for yourself of like, okay, this month I'm going to reach out for 5 relationships. And I think the wonderful part of it is that we're not locked geographically, so you can reach out. And I think being intentional about, okay, what do I need now? What's missing in my group of networking? Sometimes you can do just a little map of your own network, and it's like, great, I've got a great group here, but I'm kind of missing mentors or peers that can advise me in this direction. So it might be something where intentionally you figure out like, okay, I really would love to reach out to somebody who can help me solve this problem or provide this kind of support. So I think stepping back and figuring out like, okay, what makes sense for me? And then being intentional, really starting to figure out like, okay, what areas might I find them? And I know somebody mentioned in a question earlier, like, I'm new to Maine, how do I find that? I think it's really sometimes starting and figuring out like, okay, what do I need? Which groups do I need? And that may help pinpoint things a little easier about, okay, where will I find that tribe? Where will I find that group? But I think going first, reaching out, whether it's you in the chat, whether it's extending yourself, reaching out to people who are on a panel, reaching out to peers, that's where you need to start. But at the end of the day, if you're not reaching out, you're probably, you're not going to get the results.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Go ahead,
consistency
Jodi.
is the
Oh.
key. I'm sorry. I think consistency is the key instead of, and this is where, I'll fail on the LinkedIn, like I'll go in for 2 months and then I'll drop back. So, the better approach is just to keep that consistency of like, okay, I'm going to put in a half hour this week or whatever to keep up those ties.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say the opportunities, I'll speak to LinkedIn, but then there's something else I want to speak to as well is, you can find, service providers that you're looking for in your business. You can find vendors, you can find potential employees. It's a great place to, find those opportunities. And I've been found on LinkedIn as well, as I shared earlier. It's been a great tool, especially during the pandemic and the lockdowns, to stay visible. And I would say also, and especially an event like this where it's webinar, like, yes, we're putting our names, our titles, our businesses, our LinkedIn profiles in the chat, but something we don't realize or may not be aware of when we attend in-person events is we look around the room and we assess who's approachable, right? Or who can I walk up to and feel comfortable talking to them? And sometimes we see people, it might be a very distinguished older gentleman. And if I'm a young woman, I may think he's not going to want to talk to me. There's this barrier, as well as, if I see their name tag and they're like the CEO of a company, again, I might feel too intimidated to talk to them. But the nice thing about the webinar format is like zero barrier to entry. You can say hello to anybody and just open up a conversation. It doesn't matter. We don't have those visual cues that might cause us to go, oh no, I can't. And because largely the conversation's happening in the chat, you can edit what you say. Right? It's not like something's going to come out of your mouth and you're too intimidated. So there is some pros and a benefit to being in a virtual world.
I think that's so interesting, and I think for our audience, we have been doing these Making It Work events now since March of 2020. I forget how many we've done. We're somewhere around 24, I think, and they all live online. They all live at the Press Herald landing page for Making It Work events, and the recordings are there, all the resource materials are there. And I wonder how many people think to go and to look at, to replay those recordings and see, look at that, and see who we've brought a lot of people who have great expertise and insight to the business community. And there might be some information shared that maybe you didn't log in at the original event, but that information and those contacts are still available to you. So you could mine those for to help fill out your network, your connections.
And Carol, I wanted to add something else too, because when the recordings are posted, the chat goes away. So I am going to recommend to everybody to open the chat, and in the lower right-hand corner, there are 3 dots right next to the face emoji. Click on that and it says Save Chat. So you can go back if you weren't able to connect with everybody now on the call, you can go back and connect with them on LinkedIn later and the chat will be saved. Another little pro tip.
I think that's great advice, because you're right. It's the chat is part of, as a moderator, I'm sort of eyeballing that to make sure that our audience is engaged. But you're right. People do present opportunities in that chat format that, if you're paying attention, you can make a connection, and that can serve you really well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Carol, I wanted to jump to that slide, because I know there was the question from the woman who, or the person who was from another area. I'm wondering if we can bring that where to start slide, because I was thinking it is super hard for somebody to break into the market. And I thought that I could just quickly cover where they might start. And I think the first part is that if it's not out there for yourself, you can create your own mastermind, you can create your own industry or your professional piece. So I think that's one wonderful thing about this time period. It's like, all right, if there's not a group for me, let me make it happen. And it only takes maybe reaching out to one or two people for them to extend their networks, or reaching out to somebody who's an expert in the field that is part of the area that they're trying to get in, that can give recommendations of like, all right, who else might be appropriate for you?
Stefa, can I just interrupt for a second?
Sure.
So I'm just to let the audience know, we received a couple of questions in advance from people who registered, and one of them was from a young person who is new to the state and wants to get into the communications field. So this information, Stefa and Jodi prepared to answer that question. And so Stefa, when you say that first check mark, if there isn't a young communications or a Maine newcomers in the communication industry association, this person could create one to go right ahead and invite people who are either in the same boat or who may have some insight worth sharing, and create that group themselves. Do I understand that correctly?
That's exactly it,
Okay.
Carol. And I think that is one of the beautiful things about Maine that I think is so compelling, as opposed to other markets. Maine is that 2 degrees of separation. It's really easy to make an impact. It's really easy to reach somebody who is a senior professional in a field. People are usually more than willing. There aren't those layers and barriers that you might find in other markets. So if they can reach out to somebody that's senior in that group, all right, maybe the first one doesn't pan out, but the second, you can usually find somebody who is incredibly generous with their time or expertise if you approach it respectfully and have the initiative and the follow through. So that's one thing I love about Maine. It's 2 degrees of separation, and there aren't all the layers that you may find in other markets. The other recommendation is just to volunteer strategically. There's a lot of work to be done in the state and within industries, and there's always the interest for different organizations to have somebody else to lend a hand on projects, and it's a great way to get hired. It's a great way to build skills and also give back. So I'd encourage that. The other part is to take a class. There's 2 benefits. It's continuing to be a lifelong learner, and it builds out your network, and you never know where those go. The next piece is really the benefit of these virtual events is you're not limited by geography. So you can join chats, you can reach out to different, people across the country in different areas. And as Jodi mentioned, you can really build those friendships in a way that you wouldn't be able to do prior to COVID with the openness that people have to receive that. The other part is at events, just network with the speakers, the breakout facilitators. Don't be afraid to approach people. And then also don't forget about your dormant contacts, who they might have. Like, look at the bottom of your text feed on your phone and look who's in the graveyard at the bottom, and just reach out and check in and see how they're doing. And you never know where that goes. So hopefully those will help somebody trying to connect in this market.
Good advice for our newcomer to Maine trying to break into the communications industry. Jodi, do you have any additional advice?
Yeah, that was a amazing list, Stefa. That was robust. I'm gonna sound like a little LinkedIn cheerleader here, but I will say this: in 2019, prior to the pandemic, 3 different women had reached out to me saying, I'm moving to Maine next year or next summer, and I'm starting to build up my connections now. And all of them, I was like, that is brilliant to lay the groundwork before you get there. And I would say you can do that, even, especially if you're here right now, you could invite somebody to connect with you, send a note saying, I'm new to the state. I'm just looking to build up my network here. Can we connect? And then just start up a conversation and see where it goes.
I think that's really good advice. And I'll just add this. Linda Verrill at Broadreach PR is going to be a panelist for our next Making It Work. And I know she has some openings right now. So for the person who submitted that question, you ought to check out Broadreach PR. Maybe there'll be a good connection there for you. So let's take one of the questions we have in the queue, Strawberry. Could you queue that up for us?
Sure thing. We have a question from Jacqueline. Any suggestions for helping new employees connect with their peers in a new organization?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. My daughter happened to change jobs just about a year ago, and she has never met in person any of her new colleagues. So what kind of advice do you have for networking within an organization if you need to do it virtually?
Mm-hmm. My suggestion would be having, I'm going to say happy hours, but it doesn't have to be a happy hour, some sort of non-work related meeting where we're all just getting to know each other, not focused on the new person to say, hey, here's this new person, let's all like introduce ourselves, but plan some activity where we can all get to know each other better. And this person is a part of that meeting. I would also say assigning, mentor might not be the right word, but maybe buddies, work buddies, where this person can check in with. It might not be their manager or their direct team, but maybe someone in the organization who can, answer their questions, just check in with them every now and again to just make them feel more welcome. I know I have a client who had told me prior to the summer, like, I've been working at this company for a year and we're going back into the office in August and I don't know where I sit and I don't know where the printer is and I don't know where the bathrooms are. So I'm going to have somebody I've been working with for the past year meet me at the door and show me around, right? But it can be done.
Stefa, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. If this is a person that doesn't have the ability to set up those happy hours or can try to do it informally, Jodi had some great recommendations there. I think you can also just use that card of I am new to this company to engage with other people in the organization and just reach out and say, hey, I'm the new kid. I'd love to learn more about your area. Would you be willing to, have a virtual coffee with me or whatever? I think it's okay. And I think people understand, people are trying to build relationships and sort of pinpoint around the company, like, okay, let me reach out. It might not work for everybody, but I think, taking that time to figure out like, okay, who else would I like to connect with might be helpful. And I think also if they're coming in, they could reach out to whoever is in the HR function and just say, you know what, I could really use a buddy. I could really use a happy hour. We all could use a beverage, what might work. So I think taking it both your own initiative, but also seeing those that do have some ability to engineer some of these things can be helpful.
Yeah, I think that for companies that are really trying to recruit and retain workers, that having an engaged HR department to initiate those kinds of things for virtual connections is a really smart move. And Stefa, you told me that there are things like icebreaker games that you can play online. Can you give me just a quick one? Because I can't even imagine how that works.
Sure, there's lots of these, and these can be warm up to events. They can be just informal. It can be as simple as somebody that has directs in a morning stand up or whatever question of the day, like, okay, it can be something silly. It can be something interesting. It can also be if you are having a virtual thing, to have everybody take 3 minutes and go grab something that's meaningful to them in the house and hold it up. And, or something that represents something that's important to them in the house. You can do another icebreaker where you're asking, different questions about what somebody's dream vacation might be. Anything that sort of gets down to that personal and that passion part. And there's tons of resources out there that can help you, think of some of these things. And I can pass some of those along if somebody's interested and they want to reach out. But there's, people have been trying to figure it out, and it can go the gamut of, trivia and bingo nights to, everybody making their own cocktails and sharing them online, and, who has voting on who's got the best design cocktail or, whatever. So there's lots of options around that, and the creativity can be really fun.
Okay, so show and tell. I'll remember that one. let's take the next question, Strawberry.
One's from Tony. Do you have any experience with the challenge of gathering vax status for events, as it is a medical record and therefore covered by HIPAA? Are there apps being used to keep your organization out of the data gathering business and the associated liability?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is a tough one. And so far it has been more on the honor system. It may, it may be if it's a live event, somebody's showing their card, so there is no, transfer of physical data happening. In other cases, it is, somebody attesting that they have received a COVID, so that there is not, the data sharing, but it's a challenge.
Are you aware of people just volunteering, like taking a snapshot of their vaccination card and sending it to their HR department, just so people know, and that is initiated by the employee? It's not a mandate coming from the employer. I'm kind of curious too about how different companies are navigating that. And I know that's kind of out of your areas of expertise, but I'm just curious, what have you been hearing of different strategies for that?
Carol, that is not, not being in the HR land, that is not something that from a compliance standpoint, that, I'm comfortable in giving advice on. I know that people are anecdotally asking, like, what's the percentage of, vaccination in our business or whatever, and those sorts of things, but how that's captured, I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. We had another question come in from someone who registered asking, so what's the replacement for getting together for coffee? Is there a virtual setup that is now kind of the go-to connection for having those initial contacts?
Zoom.
It is back on Zoom.
It's here to stay, right? And virtual coffees are here to stay, and they're here to stay because they work, right? They're convenient, and I'll give this my personal experience. So I became a certified as a women business enterprise in September. And so attended my first matchmaker event. And this is an event that connects businesses with larger companies who are looking for vendors. And it was on a virtual platform, and the meetings were meant to be 15 minutes, right? And so I'm also going to say to people, the other benefit of meeting virtually is they don't have to be long meetings. You don't have to carve out 2 hours to commute, sit down for coffee, commute back. We had a 15-minute conversation, and in the beginning, we connected, we shared something we had in common. We were both new to the platform. I was newly certified. She was new in her role as of 3 months. We congratulated each other. And then we got down to business. Like, she wanted to know about my business, my services. So I shared that with her. And then she shared with me the process that her company uses to onboard vendors and what would be required of me, asked me if I had any questions. And then she happened to mention that, if you send me this stuff next week, you'll get an autoresponder because I'm going to be out of the office. And I said, oh, I hope you're doing something fun. And she's like, yeah, I'm going on a trip with my parents. Instantly, we started connecting about how precious it is to spend time with your parents as they're getting older and how we take them for granted when they're younger. It was a 15-minute conversation. I'm telling you, Carol, I would feel very comfortable calling her when she got back from her trip to say, how did it go? Right? It doesn't have to be a long meeting to create a connection. We got business done and we created a personal connection. And I would say, before you meet in person to have coffee with somebody, do a 15-minute introductory meeting to see, does this make sense? Is there more to talk about, to dive in deeper before you commit your time? Now, if you're new in business and you have time, great, like, meet as many people as you possibly can. But as our businesses become more established, our time is tighter and it's valuable. And those 15-minute virtual introductions, I think, are like the way of the future.
That's great. Anything to add to that, Stefa?
No, I think Jodi covered it. Zoom is here to stay. It can really provide some benefits. It certainly doesn't replace in person, but in many cases, it can build bridges that, weren't possible before.
Great. So as just a word, I'm just curious, Jodi, if you had to put a bet down, do you think that the Maine Women's Conference in 2022 will be in person, or do you think it'll be hybrid, or what do you? I know that's kind of unfair. You're all geared for your, for the one that's happening in a couple of weeks, but I'm just curious, what's your gut tell you?
I will tell you, it's more than my gut. We are making an announcement on the second day of our conference, and I won't give all the details, but I would tell you right now, our plan is we are meeting in person, and
Cool.
we're going to make it happen.
There's going to be a lot of pent up energy in that room.
Oh yeah. I know everyone wants to know what's happening. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Well, I would like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank our sponsors. I'd like to thank the audience for logging in today, and remind them that this event has been recorded, and all of our slides and everything else will be posted on the Press Herald landing page. So if you want to share this with someone, or you registered and you couldn't quite make it, you're more than welcome to check it out after the fact online. But most importantly, I'd like to thank our panelists. I think, Jodi and Stefa, you guys were terrific. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that others did as well. So thank you for that. And once again, to the audience,